The first thing Eliza Carter felt was the cold. Not the kind that brushed the skin, but the kind that crawled into your chest and settled there, heavy and unmoving. It had been there since dawn, since her mother's quiet sobs drifted through the thin boarding house walls and wrapped themselves around Eliza's heart like a warning. She lay awake on the narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling above her, already knowing what the day would bring. Some truths arrived before words ever touched them. When her mother called her name, her voice broke halfway through it. Eliza. The sound carried fear, shame, finality. She rose without speaking and pulled on her only decent dress. The pale blue one she had mended so many times the fabric had thinned to near transparency. Her hands shook as she fastened the buttons. In the small mirror above the wash basin, her reflection looked older than 19. Her eyes were too serious, her mouth set too firmly like someone bracing for a blow. When she stepped into the main room, her father sat hunched at the table, elbows on his knees, his hat crushed in his hands. He didn't look up right away. "Eliza," he said at last, "sit down." She didn't. Her mother hovered near the window, twisting a handkerchief until it was damp and shapeless. The silence between them felt thick enough to choke on. "What is it?" Eliza asked quietly. Her father swallowed. "There's a man, a farmer. His name is Samuel Reed." The words meant nothing, not yet. "He's willing to settle my debt." Her stomach dropped. "How?" Her father's jaw tightened. "By marrying you." The room seemed to tilt. Eliza grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "You sold me," she said, her voice flat with disbelief. "Like property." Her mother made a broken sound. "Eliza, please." "Don't." She held up a trembling hand. "Just don't." Her father stood, desperation sharpening his features. "I had no choice. You know what the creditors would have done, prison, or worse. This way you'll be taken care of." She laughed then, a hollow sound that scraped her throat raw. "Taken care of? By a stranger I've never met? He's a decent man," her father insisted, "owns land, works hard, he's not cruel." "That's the standard now?" Her voice cracked. "Not cruel?" Silence fell heavy and absolute. "You'll be married today," her mother whispered. "The ceremony is this afternoon." Eliza's chest tightened until breathing hurt. Today. Not even a day to mourn the life being ripped away from her. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. "At the church." She nodded once. There was nothing else to say. The small chapel at the edge of town smelled of dust and old wood. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting pale bars across the aisle. A handful of townspeople sat scattered in the pews, whispering behind gloved hands. Eliza stood at the back, her hands folded tightly in front of her, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. When the music began, thin, off-key, she took her first step forward. Then she saw him. Samuel Reed stood near the altar, tall and broad-shouldered, his clothes worn but clean. His dark hair was neatly combed, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked uncomfortable in his stiff jacket, like a man wearing a borrowed life. When his eyes met hers, something flickered there. Surprise, maybe, or regret, or something gentler she couldn't name. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. As she reached his side, she noticed his hands. Scarred, calloused. The hands of someone who worked until exhaustion was a daily companion. The minister began to speak, his voice echoing faintly in the small space. Eliza heard none of it. Her heart pounded too loudly. When the time came, she felt Samuel's hand close around hers. His touch was warm, steady. "You don't have to be afraid," he murmured so quietly only she could hear. She swallowed hard. The words should have meant nothing. They should have been empty, rehearsed. But something in his voice, gentle, unassuming, made her chest tighten. When the minister asked if she would take this man as her husband, her throat closed. The word trembled. She looked at Samuel again. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't triumphant. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a promise he didn't know how to keep. "I do," she whispered. The words felt like stepping off a cliff. The ceremony ended quickly. Polite applause followed, a few murmured congratulations, then it was over. Outside, a small wagon waited. Dust swirled around its wheels as if impatient to leave town behind. Samuel helped her up, careful not to touch more than necessary. When he climbed up beside her and took the reins, she noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "I know this isn't what you wanted," he said quietly as the wagon lurched forward. "But I swear to you, I'll never hurt you, not ever." She looked ahead at the long dirt road stretching into the distance, toward a life she had never chosen. "I hope that's true," she replied. The wagon creaked forward, carrying them away from everything she'd known. Behind them, the town shrank until it was nothing more than dust and memory. Ahead waited a man she didn't know, a life she didn't choose and a future that terrified her. And yet, as the wind brushed her face and the land opened wide before them, something inside her whispered that this was not the end. It was the beginning of something she could not yet name. The wagon rolled forward with a slow, steady rhythm, the wooden wheels creaking as they cut through the dirt road. Eliza kept her hands folded in her lap, fingers clenched tight enough to ache. The wind tugged at the hem of her dress, carrying the smell of dry earth and sun-warmed grass. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, open and exposed, with no shelter but the sky itself. She'd never felt so small, or so untethered. Finally, Samuel cleared his throat. "I know this isn't what you wanted," he said quietly. "I won't pretend otherwise." She glanced at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "You don't have to say anything." "I want to," he replied. "I owe you that much." She waited. "I didn't ask for a wife," he continued. "I asked for a way to keep my land. I told myself it was practical, necessary. But that doesn't make it fair to you." His hands tightened on the reins. The muscles in his jaw flexed. "If you'd rather not speak to me for the rest of this journey, I'll understand." Eliza considered that. Silence had been her shield for so long, against disappointment, against hope. But something in his tone made her answer. "I don't hate you," she said softly. "I just don't know you." He nodded, accepting that without protest. "That's fair." They rode on, the wind filling the quiet between them. After a time, the road narrowed and sloped downward, revealing a modest stretch of land nestled between low hills. A weathered farmhouse sat near the center, its paint faded but its structure sturdy. A small barn stood nearby, and beyond it, fields rolled out in uneven patches of green and brown. "That's it," Samuel said. "Home." Eliza studied it carefully. It wasn't beautiful, but it wasn't the ruin she'd imagined either. There was something solid about it. Honest. As the wagon slowed, she noticed details. A line of laundry fluttering in the breeze, a garden bed struggling against stubborn soil, the faint smell of wood smoke lingering in the air. Samuel helped her down, his hand steady at her elbow. "I know it's not much," he said quietly, "but it's yours if you want it to be." She looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded once. "I'll try." That seemed to matter more to him than anything else she could have said. Inside, the house was small but clean. A simple table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and a narrow bed in the adjoining room. No frills, no warmth yet, just the bones of a life waiting to be filled. "I'll show you around," he said. "Then I'll leave you be for a bit. You've had a long day." He showed her where the water was drawn, how to work the stove, where the blankets were kept. He spoke gently, carefully, as though afraid of startling her. When he finished, he hesitated near the door. "I'll be in the barn for a while," he said. "You should rest." She nodded. As the door closed behind him, silence settled around her. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of her parents' house, but something quieter, expectant. She moved through the small space slowly, touching the worn table, the back of a chair, the edge of the bed. Each object carried the imprint of a life lived simply, deliberately. On the table sat a folded cloth. She unfolded it to find a loaf of bread wrapped carefully inside, still warm. Her throat tightened. She sat down, hands folded in her lap, and for the first time since the morning allowed herself to breathe. Outside, she could hear the distant rhythm of Samuel's work, wood being shifted, a hammer striking metal. Each sound anchored her, reminded her she wasn't alone. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in amber and rose, Eliza stepped outside. Samuel stood by the fence, his back to her, gazing toward the fields. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He turned, surprised. "You think so?" "Yes." He studied her face as if searching for mockery or pity, then nodded once. "It's hard land, but it's honest." She stepped closer, the earth warm beneath her feet. "So are you." He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted between them. An unspoken understanding, fragile but real. That night they ate in near silence. Not an uncomfortable one, but a tentative quiet, like two people learning the shape of a shared space. When the lamp was extinguished and darkness filled the room, Samuel hesitated near the bed. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said. "You don't have to," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's room enough." He looked at her, searching for doubt. Finding none, he nodded. They lay side by side, not touching, the space between them thick with awareness. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass. Eliza stared at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she didn't feel completely alone. And somewhere in that quiet, uncertain space between fear and hope, something new began to take root. Morning came softly, light slipping through the thin curtains and settling across the floorboards in pale stripes. Eliza woke slowly, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. The narrow bed. The quiet house. The man sleeping just a few feet away on the pallet near the hearth. She turned her head slightly. Samuel lay on his back, one arm flung over his chest, his breathing deep and even. In sleep, the tension she'd come to recognize softened his features. He looked younger like this, less guarded, almost peaceful. She slipped from the bed carefully, easing her weight onto the floor so the boards wouldn't creak. The morning air was cool, brushing her bare arms as she pulled on her dress and tied her hair back. The simple act of moving through the small kitchen felt strange. This place was already beginning to feel like hers, though she'd been there less than a full day. She stoked the stove with practiced care, coaxing a small flame to life. The kettle began to heat. She found flour, salt, and the last of the dried apples, and set about making something resembling breakfast. Her hands moved automatically, grateful for the familiar rhythm of work. When Samuel stirred, she heard it instantly. He sat up, blinking, and for a brief moment seemed unsure where he was. Then his gaze found her, standing near the stove, hair loosely pinned, sleeves rolled up. "Oh," he said softly, "you're awake." "Yes." She hesitated. "I hope you don't mind. I thought I'd make something to eat." "I don't mind at all," he said quickly. "You don't have to." "I want to," she interrupted gently. "Let me." He nodded, pulling on his boots. "I'll fetch some water." They moved around each other carefully, still learning the shape of one another's presence. It felt fragile, like the early stages of a truce, something that could deepen or dissolve with one wrong step. When they finally sat to eat, the simple meal tasted better than either expected. There was comfort in the quiet clink of tin cups, in the shared warmth of the stove. Afterward, Samuel stood and reached for his coat. "I'll be working the north fence today. A storm took part of it down last week. You don't have to." "I want to help," she said before he could finish. He hesitated. "It's hard work." "So is everything else here," she replied evenly. "I need to learn." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you'll go at your own pace." They walked together toward the pasture, the morning sun warming the earth beneath their boots. Samuel handed her a pair of gloves and showed her how to hold the wire steady while he drove the posts back into place. At first her hands fumbled, fingers unaccustomed to the rough metal, but she persisted, biting back small cries when the wire scraped her skin. Samuel noticed and gently corrected her grip. "Like this," he said quietly, guiding her hands with his own. His touch was careful, respectful. She caught her breath, more aware of him in that moment than she had been since arriving. He stepped back quickly, as if realizing the same thing. They worked in silence after that, the sound of hammer on post filling the air. By midday, the sun burned high and sweat dampened the back of her dress. Her arms ached and her shoulders protested, but she didn't stop. When she finally straightened, wiping her brow, she realized something with a small jolt of pride. She was doing it. She was keeping up. Samuel noticed too. "You're doing well," he said simply. She smiled, the praise warming her more than the sun. "I'm stronger than I look. I believe it." They ate their midday meal under the shade of a lone cottonwood, sharing bread and cheese. Flies buzzed lazily. The land stretched wide around them, quiet and endless. "Why did you really agree to this?" she asked suddenly. "To marry me." He didn't answer right away. He picked up a stone, turned it over in his palm. "I was tired of being alone," he said finally. "And I didn't want to live the rest of my life with only the sound of my own footsteps for company." She studied his face. "Was it that lonely?" "Yes." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "Lonely enough that I stopped caring if I lived or died. I figured if I was going to go on, I needed a reason bigger than myself." "And now?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze. "Now I have one." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. There was too much truth in his words to treat them lightly. They worked until the sun dipped low, then headed back toward the house together. That evening, as they shared supper in the quiet companionship of the fading day, something shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. Later, as darkness settled and the wind whispered through the grass, Eliza stood at the window watching the stars appear one by one. Samuel came to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Do you ever miss your old life?" he asked softly. She thought of the narrow room, the hushed voices, the sense of being trapped by expectations she never chose. She thought of the way her heart had felt hollow there. "I miss parts of it," she said honestly, "but I don't miss who I was there." He nodded, understanding. I don't miss who I was before you, he said. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. She turned to him, her face lit faintly by moonlight. This life we're building, she said quietly. It scares me sometimes. It scares me too. But it feels real, she added. Yes, he agreed. It does. They stood in silence, side by side, listening to the night. No promises were made, none were needed. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass, whispering of endurance, of things that bend but do not break. And in that small house on the edge of the prairie, two people who had once been strangers began slowly and cautiously to become something more than alone. The days grew warmer, and with them came a rhythm that settled quietly into Eliza's bones. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, waking her before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. She learned to rise without thinking, to dress quickly, to move through the small house without waking Samuel unless he needed to be up. Some mornings he was already gone, out in the fields before dawn, working the soil while the world still slept. Other mornings she found him sitting at the table, staring into his cup of coffee like it might reveal answers if he looked long enough. They spoke easily now, without the careful pauses that had once defined their conversations. Not everything needed words anymore. The farm demanded their attention, their strength, their patience. There was no room for hesitation. Crops had to be tended, fences repaired, tools cleaned and sharpened. Each task bled into the next until hours passed unnoticed. Eliza learned fast. She learned how to mend torn sacks and sharpen blades, how to tell when a plant needed water and when it needed to be left alone. She learned how to move with purpose, how to carry weight without complaining, how to ignore the ache in her muscles until it faded into a dull, manageable throb. And Samuel watched her with quiet admiration, not because she worked like a man, but because she worked like someone who refused to surrender. One afternoon, while repairing a broken fence near the far edge of the property, the sky darkened without warning. A wall of clouds rolled in from the west, thick and heavy. "Storm's coming," Samuel said, scanning the sky. "We should head back." They had barely taken 10 steps when the first crack of thunder split the air. Rain followed immediately, hard and sudden, soaking them within seconds. "Run," he shouted. They laughed as they ran, slipping in the mud, breathless and soaked through by the time they reached the house. Inside, they leaned against the door, laughing in disbelief, water dripping from their clothes onto the wooden floor. For a moment, they just stood there, chests rising and falling, eyes meeting. The air between them shifted. Eliza became acutely aware of how close he was, of how his laughter softened into something quieter, of how his gaze lingered just a moment too long. She took a step back, suddenly unsure. I'll get towels," she said quickly. He nodded, stepping aside. "Of course." They moved around each other awkwardly, both pretending nothing had changed, but the tension followed them like a living thing. That night they ate in near silence, each lost in thought. The rain drummed steadily against the roof, a constant reminder of how close they were, how easily lines could blur. When the dishes were done and the lamp turned low, Samuel hesitated near the table. "Eliza," he said softly, "about earlier." She looked at him, heart hammering. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he continued. "I never want you to feel like you owe me anything, not now, not ever." "I know," she replied. "And I appreciate that more than you realize." A pause. "But I also don't want to pretend I don't feel anything," she added quietly. "Because I do." His breath caught. "So do I." The admission hung between them, fragile and electric. That night they lay in their separate places again. But sleep came slowly. Every sound felt louder. Every thought pressed close. Sometime before dawn, Eliza awoke to the sound of soft rain tapping against the roof. She turned on her side, staring into the darkness, and realized her heart was racing, not with fear, but with longing. She whispered his name. "Samuel." "Yes?" "I can't sleep." "Neither can I." A long pause. "Do you want company?" he asked gently. Her answer was barely more than a breath. "Yes." He rose quietly and crossed the room, stopping a careful distance from the bed. In the dim light she could see his hesitation, his restraint. "You're sure?" he asked. She reached for his hand. He joined her on the bed, careful not to crowd her. Their shoulders touched. Then slowly, tentatively, she rested her head against his chest. His arm came around her, tentative at first, then steady. They lay like that, listening to each other breathe. Nothing more, but something profound shifted in that stillness. Not passion, not urgency, something deeper, belonging. For the first time since her life had been torn apart, Eliza felt safe enough to sleep. Morning came softly again, as it always did. Sunlight crept through the window, warming the bed. and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then she felt it, the steady rise and fall of Samuel's chest beneath her cheek, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. She didn't move. Neither did he. Eventually he stirred. "Morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Morning." He smiled faintly. "You slept." "I did. So did I." They stayed that way a few minutes longer, savoring the quiet intimacy of shared warmth. When she finally pulled away to sit up, he let her go without resistance. "I should make breakfast," she said. "I'll help." And just like that, they fell back into their new rhythm, easy, unforced, full of unspoken understanding. Later that day, as they worked together in the field, Eliza realized something had changed. The work felt lighter, the air less heavy. The future, once so uncertain, no longer frightened her in the same way. She still didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time she wasn't facing it alone. And that, she realized, made all the difference. The change came quietly, the way most important things do. It began with small moments. Samuel reaching for her hand without thinking when the wind turned cold. Eliza humming softly while she worked, the sound of their laughter carrying farther across the fields than either of them realized. The house felt warmer now, fuller, as if it had been waiting for them to become this before allowing itself to feel like a home. But peace, Eliza learned, never lasted long without being tested. It was late afternoon when the stranger rode in. She saw him first from the kitchen window, a dark shape moving against the pale horizon. Her stomach tightened. No one came out this way without reason. "Samuel," she called, her voice low. He looked up from the table where he was mending a harness. The moment he saw the rider, his posture changed. His shoulders squared, his jaw set. "I'll handle it," he said. He stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. Eliza moved closer to the window, watching as the rider reined in his horse near the fence. The man dismounted with practiced ease. He wore a fine coat dusted with travel, boots polished too clean for honest labor. They spoke quietly at first. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Samuel stiffen. Then the stranger glanced toward the house, toward her. Her stomach clenched. She watched as Samuel stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the man and the house, his body a clear barrier. The stranger's mouth twisted into a thin smile. A moment later, Samuel turned and came back inside, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. "Who was that?" she asked, already knowing the answer would not be simple. He dragged a hand through his hair. "Someone from town." "About what?" He hesitated, then sighed. "About you." Her heart dropped. "What do you mean?"
"He claims your father still owes money. Says the agreement was never settled properly." His jaw tightened. "He's trying to use that to pressure me."
"Pressure you to do what?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "To hand you over." The word struck like a slap. She felt the room tilt, her breath catching painfully in her chest. "He can't do that," she said. "I'm your wife." Samuel's eyes burned. "I know that, and I won't let him." Fear crept in, cold and insistent. "What if he tries to take me anyway?" "He won't," Samuel said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." She searched his face, looking for doubt. She found none. Only resolve. "He'll be back," Samuel continued. "Men like that don't walk away easily." "What do we do?" He exhaled slowly. "We stand our ground." That night, sleep came hard. Every sound made Eliza's heart jump. The wind against the house, a branch scraping the wall, the distant cry of an animal in the dark. Samuel lay awake beside her, one arm draped protectively across her waist. She pressed closer without thinking, drawing strength from his warmth. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I know," he murmured. "So am I." She turned her face into his chest. "Promise me you won't do anything reckless." "I promise I'll do whatever I must to keep you safe." It wasn't quite the same thing. The next morning, Samuel rose early and hitched the horse. Eliza watched from the doorway as he checked his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To town," he replied. "I need to speak with someone, make sure this ends." Her chest tightened. "I don't like it." "I know." He stepped close and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin gently. "I'll be back before dark." She nodded, though fear coiled in her stomach. The hours dragged. She tried to busy herself with chores, but her hands trembled. Every sound outside made her jump. When the sun dipped low and Samuel still hadn't returned, dread settled over her like a weight. She paced the floor, peering out the window again and again. Then at last she saw him. He came over the rise slowly, walking beside the horse instead of riding. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Relief flooded her so fast her knees nearly gave out. She ran to meet him. "What happened?" she asked, searching his face. He exhaled shakily. "It's over." She waited, barely breathing. "I paid what he claimed was owed. Every last cent I had saved." His voice was rough. "He signed a paper." Said he'd leave us alone. Her heart twisted. You gave up everything. He met her gaze. I'd do it again. Tears burned her eyes. Samuel. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. You're my wife, my home. No land or money matters more than that. Emotion surged through her, fierce and overwhelming. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on as if the world might try to pull him away. I won't ever forget this, she whispered. He rested his forehead against hers. Neither will I. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the land in golden shadow, they stood together, bruised, uncertain, but unbroken. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them side by side. And for the first time since her life had been turned upside down, Eliza believed it. The land changed after that. Not in any way a stranger would notice at first glance, but Eliza felt it in the quiet mornings and the way the wind moved through the tall grass. The farm no longer felt like a place she was surviving. It felt like a place she belonged. Samuel worked harder than ever in the days that followed, repairing fences, mending tools, tending the fields with a steady determination that bordered on stubbornness. He spoke little of the money he'd lost, and she learned not to ask. Instead,